Good afternoon. Just as I was uploading a new video with the latest immigration changes, there was a major government announcement. So I'm adding a little bit to the front of this video, so the rest of the video will continue after this. The announcement is that, well, first thing, we've had a major drop in the number of new confirmed cases. There's 29, which is fantastic. It's showing that the curve is really being squashed by Jacinda Ardern and her government. The important part is that anybody now flying to the New Zealand as of midnight tonight will be required to do 2 weeks of, they're calling it quarantine. They're also calling it self-isolation. Now the difference is that quarantine is you will be in a room. You'll be stuck in that room. It won't be like a jail cell. It'll be a hotel room, but you will not be allowed to leave your room. You'll have food brought to you, that sort of thing. Those are the people who are showing symptoms. Those coming to New Zealand that are showing no symptoms are what they're calling self-isolation, but it will be at a facility provided by the government, most likely a hotel. Now you'll be allowed to leave the room and walk around, but there will be security on the actual premises so that you cannot sort of wander off and not do the isolation. So effectively we are doing quarantine for everybody coming into the country for 2 weeks from midnight tonight, today being the 9th of April. That is the new news, and now on to the rest of the video. Good morning, New Zealand. It is 9th of April at 10:50 a.m. This is take 2 after I recorded this entire video and realized the microphone wasn't working. Now, there's been a number of changes for Immigration New Zealand since our last video, so we're going to quickly go through those. There is quite a few changes, so let's just jump into it and see how fast we can get through them. First thing, Immigration New Zealand is effectively closed. There are some allowances for visas being granted for people who are working in certain areas, and we'll come to that later in the video. But generally, the onshore branches, offshore branches, everything is closed. So if you have a visa being processed and you don't fall in one of the essential groups we'll come to, then don't expect anything to take place, because it's just not going to happen. Now, for those, there is those who can apply to get a visa to come into the country based on their working in an area of essential need, which is generally for healthcare. As of yesterday, they'd had about 2,500 expressions of interest, people who are looking to get a visa to allow them to come across with the border closures. Of that, about 2,000 had been decided so far, and just 369 of that 2,000 had actually met the criteria and been invited to apply for a visa. So that's a very small number. They're being very strict, and understandably so. They want to keep this country protected from those who may be bringing in further virus from offshore. Now, there is an issue, of course, that they have a list of skills they're looking at, and these are the ones they're generally granting it to, and that is doctors, nurses, phlebotomists, and all these sorts of roles, which we definitely need people. I'm not discounting the need for them and the importance of those roles, but it isn't covering other areas that may provide support services to the DHB, such as logistics, IT, and those sorts of staff. Now, in regards to IT, you could have IT support engineers who focus on doing it for hospitals, who are well familiar with the software in use by hospitals. So it is it's important that they also get covered, but they are being handled on a case-by-case basis. So I think such people have an opportunity to get a visa. It just might not fall as quickly into the categorization that they currently have. Now, of course, before we mentioned in a previous video that they were granting extended visas, temporary visas, to those who had visas that expired between 2 April and 9th of July. Now that's 85,000 people who have had a temporary visa extended. So if that is you, then you should have received an email from Immigration New Zealand to confirm that your visa now expires on 25th of September. If you haven't received that email, then go onto the Immigration New Zealand website. There is a visa verification service on there. You can fill in your details, and they will confirm whether your visa has received that extension. It should have by default. If not, then please let us know. We can look into it. Now, for those of you who are currently here on a work visa and there's been an issue with your role, whether you've sadly lost the role, the role has come to an end. Now, there's a few options here. You are required to notify Immigration New Zealand when that role has come to an end, because that is a substantial change to your situation. Your work visa will be tied to that role, and that role doesn't exist, then your work visa should also be coming to an end at the same time. If you can find another role which you can apply for, then fantastic, put an application in for a work visa for that role. At the same time, you'll be notifying Immigration New Zealand that your current role has come to an end, and the work visa for the new application won't be processed for some time. You'll get an interim visa to allow you to remain in the country. You can't work until that visa has been granted or been processed, but at least it means you'll be in the country lawfully. Now, if you don't have another offer for another role, and your job comes to an end, Immigration New Zealand aren't heartless. They aren't going to expect you to leave the country immediately as your job ends. You should apply for a visitor visa on the basis that you're looking for another position, or they gives you a chance to leave the country to sort out your affairs here, end your lease, that sort of thing. Typically, people will apply to get that visitor visa to look for another role, but they should be aware that if they can't find another role, the expectation is that before that visa expires, you will have left the country. Again, the applications right now aren't being processed, so you're going to be getting an interim visa. It will hold you through until the visa, until the application is processed. How long that will be, we can't tell. Now, if you're lucky enough to have an offer for a job, and your previous and your new job are the same role, but both of them fall onto a skill shortage list, whether it's the long-term skill shortage list or a regional list, then you can actually apply for a variation to your work visa. So instead of applying for a whole new work visa, all you're doing is a very short application that you're varying from one employer to another. Now, the requirement for that is that the list that the job appears on will have requirements as to qualification and experience. So it may require you have a bachelor's degree, or it may require you have registration with a certain government authorised body, and you have so many years of experience in that role. The reason for this is that we have jobs which the country admits that there's a shortage on. There is no need for the employer to prove once again to Immigration New Zealand that there's a shortage. They can't find staff, and we want people of that who fill those roles to be able to come to the country or stay in the country and to do that work. So it is an easier process. There is no guarantee that it's going to be processed quickly with the current shutdown. Just branches are closed. If you are working in an area which does fall into that one of those essential skills, primarily in the healthcare field, then you should be able to get it to be pushed through a bit faster. We're currently working on that for one client whose employer is definitely in that essential area and is crying out for our staff members' work. So for our clients' work. So we are working with Immigration New Zealand on getting that pushed through, the variation pushed through as quickly as possible so it doesn't impact the supply of this essential skill during this COVID-19 period. Now we're looking at the residency applications. Now, first of all, we'll talk about a skilled migrant application. That's the one that most of you will be aware of and a lot will be aiming for. Now, I've done an article on this previously on the Immigration Partners website, which goes through the process for skilled migrant. What the first part of that is that you make an application online. It's called an expression of interest, an EOI. Every 2 weeks, those are drawn from the pool. Those with 160 points or more are drawn, and then a week or two later you receive an invitation to apply, an ITA. Because there is no staff currently at Immigration New Zealand working on these, the EOI draws, so that 2-weekly draw, have been deferred until the future. They haven't said when in the future. But we would expect this to probably be the first of these delayed EOIs to return, but it will still probably be sometime after the lockdown is raised, purely on the basis that this lockdown period will create a massive backlog for what was already a very backlogged system. So we can't see Immigration New Zealand wanting to hurry these things up. Currently, as it is, these applications are taking more than a year to process. So giving Immigration New Zealand a short break to try and get that list of applications down a little bit, they'll probably jump at the chance. There has been rumours that Immigration New Zealand were may look at just cancelling all the applications in that pool. That did take place back in the 1990s, when every application for residency under the same sort of scheme was just, well, not so much cancelled, but they changed one of the rules, so all of a sudden all those applications were no longer valid. Allowed them to start afresh, get rid of a long backlog of applications. Now, they've been asked a number of times whether they'll do this again, and they have said no every single time. Even in the last few days, they've said once again, no, we will not do that. The applications that are made will stay there, they'll be processed. We will not be doing a mass cancellation of applications, which is a great thing. Now, the next group being deferred is the new parent category group. Now, this was originally cancelled a few years ago. They brought them, well, temporarily delayed for a year, and 3 or 4 years later they brought them back. This is the one which requires the sponsor, being the child, to earn a substantial amount of money to be able to sponsor the parent to come and retire in this country. Now, initially this was looking at a late May 2020 was the first draw under this new category. It just came through in the last few months, but it has been deferred until further notice. And I think this will be deferred a bit longer, on the basis that where with skilled migrant, the vast majority of the applicants are already in the country. With the parent category, the vast majority are not. So we are looking at bringing people in from overseas. And the idea that Immigration New Zealand have is that visas which have people coming in from overseas will be delayed or deferred to some degree until we can be certain that either they come from a place which doesn't have COVID-19 outbreaks, or we can handle them and quarantine them or look after them when they do come into the country to make sure that we don't get further outbreaks and then further time in lockdown. So this will be deferred, I think, for a bit longer than the skilled migrant applications. We will see, but there hasn't been a draw for this category yet. The last time they did a similar draw was several years ago. So it's not so much that they're ending something that was already in place. It was a new category coming through, and I can see this being pushed back a bit further. I can also see the changes that were being talked about coming through in sort of June, July, with changes to ANSCO and work visas. Those will possibly also be delayed. Not sure until when, which is a shame, because I was looking forward to those changes coming in. We still have nothing in writing as to how they were going to work. I think that was being worked on before the lockdown took place, so this will again create a delay in that, possibly till later this year. We do have the election coming up, so it may even be delayed till after the election. Right now we don't know, and Immigration New Zealand have bigger things to look at than to consider what the timing is going to be around that. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the recognised seasonal employers. These are staff who come in to work in the horticulture and viticulture industries, which of course are involved in the supply of food, which are an essential service. Now, these often include people who are doing picking and packaging of food for the local and the export markets. Now, these workers will often move around from site to site depending on the needs of the employer. If one harvest finishes, there'll be another harvest they need to go to. But of course, they still have the requirements of lockdown and of security. So the employer is required to submit to Immigration New Zealand travel and accommodation plans for all of those employees. They will need to get approval from Immigration New Zealand and the Labour Inspectorate, who's also part of the MBIE, before any worker is relocated, and the worker will be provided with an authorised letter for their travel. So if the worker was stopped while travelling between the sites by the police to check on their movement, they should have a letter from Immigration New Zealand or the Labour Inspectorate to confirm they can make that movement. Now, teams of employees, so RSE employees, will actually be treated as a bubble. So if you have a group of, say, a dozen employees who are working under the RSE scheme, they are a bubble. They are not to interact with other groups. They are isolated on their own. They should be then moved together to the next site and continue to be isolated with the new location. There are also a requirement on the employer to provide them with PPE, personal protective equipment, so they can do their job and to be safe while doing that job. They are a role where there's going to be a lot of interaction with, of course, with their bubble, which could be a larger bubble than most of you and I will be experiencing. So there's a requirement there to definitely keep them safe, especially with their moving between sites. Now, next we're looking at is transiting and departing from New Zealand. So that's two different things. So of course, transiting means that you're coming through New Zealand to go to another place. Departing is you're leaving New Zealand to go to another place. Now, currently, Australian citizens, residents, and their immediate family. Now, in this next section, immediate family means their partner, legal guardians, dependent children, are able to transit New Zealand to Australia. So if they're Australians and they wanted to go to Australia, but the only flight they have goes through New Zealand, probably a relatively rare situation at the moment, but it means that they can travel to New Zealand, stay within the transit lounge, and then go on to Australia. They cannot enter into New Zealand, they must go through. Now, New Zealand citizens, residents, and immediate family who normally live in Australia can also transit through New Zealand to return to Australia. Of course, they can also come to New Zealand being New Zealand citizens and residents. But if they came to New Zealand, they're required to self-isolate as required. Of course, New Zealand citizens, permanent residents who normally live in New Zealand, and of course their immediate family, are able to transit Australia to New Zealand. So same sort of thing as the other way. If you had a flight from overseas coming to New Zealand that goes via Australia, you can go through Australia, but you must remain in the transit area and cannot enter Australia. The difference here is that this is for permanent residents of New Zealand, not just residents. So if you have a residency in New Zealand, you want to come back to New Zealand, you must be flying direct or get some sort of allowance directly from Immigration Australia. Now, agreements have been made with Germany for their citizens to return to Germany. There's been chartered planes with Lufthansa, Concordia, and Air New Zealand. Similar flights are being arranged for Swiss and Austrian nationals. Now, the time of this filming, I'm not aware of any other countries that have arranged this, but I'm sure there's others in the works or have already been arranged to allow their nationals to depart New Zealand and return to their country of citizenship. Now, people on these flights are able to fly domestically in New Zealand, and it's been considered an essential service. Now, those are domestic flights that end up in Auckland and Christchurch, because that's the only places where the international flights are allowed to depart from. But people can fly to Auckland and Christchurch via Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Nelson, and Dunedin. Those are the only airports that you may fly to Auckland and Christchurch from, or it may be that you have to fly perhaps from Nelson to Wellington to Auckland to get to an Auckland flight. These are deemed essential travel, but while you are travelling on these flights, again, use every precaution, stay safe, make sure you don't pick up on the way through. Now, for people coming into the country, the New Zealand border does remain closed to almost all travellers due to COVID-19. There are exceptions, of course, to essential workers. Now, this has to be noted on their visa. They are an essential worker. An application to Immigration New Zealand has been made to get that status. Travelling for humanitarian purposes, those from Tonga and Samoa who are travelling for essential reasons, and New Zealand citizens, of course, can also come into the country. Now, New Zealand residents can come into the country along with their partners, dependents, but only if they have been in New Zealand previously on that residence visa. If you've been granted a residence visa but you have never travelled into New Zealand on that visa, you cannot come into New Zealand on that visa. It will not be considered to be valid until you've actually been here before. You need to wait until the lockdown has come to an end and the border reopens. Now, there is an allowance for those who aren't residents or citizens. If you are on a temporary visa, so work visa, student visa, and you're ordinarily resident in New Zealand, so you typically live in New Zealand on that visa, and your partner is also ordinarily resident in New Zealand and are already in New Zealand, then you have a right to return to New Zealand to be with your partner. It's a very strict criteria. If you fit into any of these categories, we'd get you to seek advice before you travel. Not just so that when you arrive into New Zealand you can say, hey, here's the confirmation from Immigration New Zealand, but also at the other end when you're actually boarding the flight. A number of countries won't be aware of these sort of scenarios which are exceptions to the rule of the border being closed. So you might want to have a letter from Immigration New Zealand or from one of these groups to say, here's the situation, this person has confirmed that they may travel to New Zealand on this basis. There is a process to get these sorts of verifications or these applications of visas varied. There is a 3 working day turnaround time. That's not guaranteed, that's their estimate. You may not require that clarification, but we would encourage it in almost every circumstance. There is fines in place if people are allowed to board a flight when they're not supposed to, so there will be people will be overly cautious before you board the flight at the foreign location. Now, for those who are in New Zealand on student visas, if you are employed in a healthcare role, which includes aged residential care, typically you'd only have a 20-hour per week allowance on most of your visas to let you work for 20 hours a week. Now you're allowed to work now full time until 3rd of July in order to support the public health response to COVID-19. So that means basically, so you can, in all the 20 hours, you can work full time, as many hours as you can do, as long as you're working in that healthcare role, including aged residential care. There's a similar allowance given for supermarket workers previously. So those students who are working in a supermarket on the 23rd of March or previous, then you can work for more than 20 hours per week up until the April 25th, so a couple of weeks' time. If you were working at a supermarket under a work visa where it had a listed role, so say it said that you're allowed to work as a baker for a supermarket, then you're allowed to work for any other role within the supermarket, even if it wasn't the one on your visa. So if they said, well, look, the bakery is a bit quiet right now, we're not baking much, we want you to go and do more hours or work hours over here in grocery or butcher or on the tills, you are allowed to do that. The exception has been made in the operational manual to allow that up until 25th of April, though that might be extended longer. Now this only applies for both the student visa allowance and for the work visa allowance to supermarkets operated by Woolworths, which is Countdown, Super Value, Fresh Choice, or operated by Foodstuffs, which is New World, Pack and Save, Foursquare, On the Spot, and Ravewood Fresh, which I wasn't aware of. Must be a brand further down the country. Any other supermarket which isn't operated by Woolworths or Foodstuffs or under their umbrella, these rules do not apply. So it doesn't apply to the smaller grocery stores around the place. And for today, that is the long list done of updates. These are coming through regularly, these updates are, so we'll do future videos on what else is coming through. There's still a number of unanswered questions with Immigration New Zealand, but in this crazy situation, they are focusing on what is a priority, and we completely understand that and support them in the process they are taking. I know it doesn't provide the answers very quickly for a lot of you who have concerns and uncertainties. But we are doing what we can do, and they are doing what they can do, and we'll try and answer any questions you've got and try and push through things to Immigration New Zealand when there are questions they may not have answered yet or they may not have thought of yet. This is a new situation and we're all feeling our way through it. So for now, New Zealand and everybody else, stay safe, stay home, kia kaha, see you next time.